Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda on this Easter Sunday, and to discuss the week, the year and indeed projecting forward to what we can expect in this entire election year, we're joined now by Senior News Limited columnist Piers Ackerman and
Morning.
Columnist from The Australian, not senior, Troy Bramston. Thanks for your company as well.
Good to be back.
Gentlemen, let me just ask you about the Craig Emerson interview off the top. He's taken over as part of his new super portfolio responsibilities, tertiary education. We're having a bit of a debate about the nature of universities, and he seemed more intent, Piers, if I can start with you,
Sure.
on people getting in and having a crack.
Well, I thought this was quite a retro argument that he was putting forward. This was the sort of class rhetoric we heard back in the days of the wars between red brick and Ivy universities. The notion that every person is equipped to go to university has sort of been discarded. It's quite apparent that dumbing down university courses so that they're acceptable for people who don't actually cut the mustard, don't hit the marks, has been an absolute waste of funding, which is fundamental. But it's dragged the levels of tertiary educations around the world right down, and it's basically made university degrees almost worthless.
Troy, do you agree with that? Because it is interesting, this idea that everyone should have a crack. I mean, people wouldn't want me having a crack at brain surgery, or they probably wouldn't want me arguing a brief for them in court. People have different talents, and not everybody, as Piers says, is necessarily equipped to go to university. It's not a class thing.
No, I think that's right. And if you had have turned on the channel this morning and seen Craig Emerson thundering about Labor values and giving everyone a chance to go to university, this was a throwback to the 1980s. In reality, this policy debate has long been settled in Australian politics. And when the Hawke government came in 1983, only 3 children in 10 finished school, which was obviously essential to getting to university. By the end of that period, it was about 7 in 10. So in terms of the level playing field that he's talking about, it's already been achieved. And also with HECS, which also removed the financial impediment to people going to university, these debates are settled. And this was simply about him thundering about Labor values in the lead up to an election. But in reality, the policy he's talking about no longer exists.
I think one of the messages here, and there's a sense of frustration coming through from both Craig Emerson and Julia Gillard, they want to make education a frontline election issue. There's absolutely no question about this. They see this as a Labor strength. They see it as an area where the coalition might be vulnerable. And so when it comes to the Gonski School agenda, when it comes to universities and their record there, we're going to hear a lot more from both Julia Gillard and Craig Emerson on this front.
It's interesting because I can see the political strength potentially for Labor in this education debate, but I feel like if you are trying to ram people in through university who it's not suited to, you are doing them a disservice rather than steering them in the right vocational path earlier in life.
I agree, Peter and Paul, but I think that the average Australian still doesn't understand Gonski. Gonski is now a term, almost of opprobrium, that the Labor Party spits at people and saying, you don't support Gonski. Well, when you actually go into Gonski, it's all about more funding and so forth and so on, and talking about class sizes. But educationalists around the world say it's attaining a good education has a lot to do with people's desire to work, the culture. Craig Emerson talked about the education in our near neighbours. If you look at Singapore, where you have almost an ethnic prerogative. These Chinese kids, which, as we've seen in our own school system here, they outstrip with their work ethic Anglo students. So just throwing money at schools, which seems to me to be the basis of the Gonski so-called reform, and I don't think you should call it a reform, is not necessarily the way to go. So I think parents should be really looking at what the Labor Party is trying to sell here.
I could talk about education policy all show, but I've got you gentlemen on to join Paul and I to discuss the year so far and where